Hey guys, welcome back to another impressions video here. Trying to slowly get into the mood. I know the new Sonic movie is coming out, so I figured let's play a few Sonic games, especially those ones that I have not played in the past. As you guys know, I grew up as a Nintendo fan, but that didn't stop me from, having an interest in the other, in the enemy per se. In Sega. Growing up in the 90s, you were either from the Nintendo camp or the Sega camp, and of course, the Sonic games are a staple of the Sega universe. And I'm a pretty big, I don't know if I should say that we're a big fan, but I am a fan of the Sonic games. Unfortunately, inconsistency, it's kind of like the keyword for the Sonic series. Some games are pretty good, some games are not so great, and then you have games that are objectively pretty bad. And sadly, Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1, from my experience, was a pretty bad game. And I'm not trying to, I know it's pretty easy to beat on a dead horse, and I know the Sonic games are usually the laughing stock. Every time there's a new Sonic game, I think it's very easy to pick on them, and it's very easy to just laugh and point at these new or Sonic games. They're pretty easy prey for gamers nowadays. But I have to be completely honest. You guys know me when I do my impressions video, but Sonic 4 Episode 1 it's not only one of my least favorite platformers. I would go ahead and say that this is probably one of the worst platformers that I've ever played, and one of the worst games that I've ever played. And again, I'm not trying to exaggerate, but it was very infuriating going through this game, and just the overall gameplay mechanics, the length of the game, pretty short game, which is kind of unfortunate because I was not having a great time with the game. The game is not terrible in the sense that it does have a lot of classic elements from other Sonic games. After all, this is Sonic 4. It's supposed to be a homage and kind of like the continuation of the original trilogy, which came out in the Sega Genesis back in the 90s. And Sonic 4, it was released much later on, like I guess 15 years later or something like that, in 2010, I believe, when a lot of fans were hyped, a lot of fans were excited and hopeful because even though Sonic team itself didn't develop the game, I think it was this other company called Dimps, which they partook in the development of the Sonic games in the Game Boy Advance. So they had some expertise already with the Sonic series, and I believe Sonic Team was involved in the development process and kind of like assisting Dimps in the development of this game. And I think I forgot his name, the Japanese guy behind Sonic 2 and Sonic 3, the level design of those games, he was involved in this one. So there was a lot of hype to have finally a proper, side-scrolling Sonic game released in 2010. And I have to admit, I am surprised at how good the reviews are for this game from back in the day. I mean, a lot of the reviews were not glaring. This game was not a 10 out of 10 or 9 out of 9, but there were a lot of like 8s and 7s, which in my opinion, that's completely wrong. Because again, I really had... my main gripe with the game is the presentation is fine. It tried to cater towards the original trilogy. After all, this is like Sonic 4, the continuation of the trilogy. So a lot of the aesthetics, the graphics and everything, they're fine. But to me, the main problem was the gameplay, and the gameplay and the level design are very, very poor in this game. So let's go step by step. I guess I'll talk about the graphics. The graphics are pretty colorful. You'll get your typical Sonic side-scrolling 2D type of graphics, even though the game has like 3D elements. The game copies or emulates a lot of the original styles from the original trilogy. The first zone, for example, Splash Zone, I believe, caters towards the whole Green Hill, looks, with bright blue skies and, the green surfaces and all that. So there's a lot of visual things, and a lot of the levels look exactly, not exactly, but they cater towards the original levels in the original trilogy, which is a good thing. So graphics themselves are not great, but they're not bad either. You know, I feel like even though by 2010 standards they could have done better, and especially with the performance. I do have to have a disclaimer. This is the PlayStation 3 version, play through PlayStation Now. And yeah, that's another thing for another video. I did subscribe to PlayStation Now to try the service. And this is a PlayStation 3 game that was streamed, you know, on my PS4 via a PlayStation Now service. So performance-wise, I think the game played okay, but there were some issues that were not exactly the fault of the game itself. Some were streaming issues that are part of PlayStation Now. But overall, you know, the graphics are okay. Nothing to write home about. But you know, they're pretty adept to, or they're pretty in line with what you would expect from a side-scrolling Sonic game. And then the soundtrack, pretty good soundtrack. You know, a lot of classic tunes, a lot of songs that are, again, you know, part of that Sonic universe. I didn't have any problems with the soundtrack. But now, focusing on the gameplay, this is where I think the game fell short a little bit. Starting with the positives, which are very few in my opinion. The game takes for example, the homing, lock-in into the enemies aspect from the 3D Sonic games, you know, from Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. In my opinion, that's a very good mechanic to have on a side-scrolling Sonic game. It just makes things easier. I feel like it aids a little bit better as far as the game design, level designers, you know, just to have a little bit better flow. So basically, it's when you see a target in the enemy, you can jump and then push the jump button again, and you will do a homing attack, and that, you know, allows you to reach certain places and whatnot. So some levels have that design component based on this homing attack. I know a lot of people are not a fan of this. They prefer the classic gameplay where you can just spin jump on enemies. But I do welcome I did welcome the homing attack jump type of gameplay mechanic in this game. Now that's pretty much the kind of like the only positive. Like the negatives are that Sonic in this particular game, and I'll be completely honest, even in the original trilogy, I always had some issues with Sonic because he is portrayed to be like this super fast character, but it's very hard to play these games in a fast manner. Like, even you have to be really good, you have to know the levels very well, and I feel like for most common people, the Mario games are actually faster. It's easier to be faster on a Mario game than on a Sonic game, if that makes any sense. And in this particular game, the startup animation is very slow. It feels like Sonic has like just a backpack full of you know, full of like heavy stuff, rocks basically. So the animation where he starts taking off, it's just it takes forever, and it's just an overall I guess pain to sometimes to gain momentum, and sometimes you don't have enough speed or build up to clear a slope area, and that creates some slow down, and then you have to go down the slopes or the loops and gain some momentum. Obviously you have your spin move that you can, you know, push down in the X button, and then you can gain speed by doing that. But then again, you know, that even after using that move, Sonic doesn't gain a lot of speed for some reason. And then, as much as I praise the homing attack, I can also, I guess, criticize it a little bit because if you don't get the target animation on the enemy, you are going to not get the hit, or you're not gonna be kill the enemy or get the jump, if that makes any sense. Like if you're off by a frame, you're not gonna get that target animation, and you're gonna hit the enemies with the same, you know, force or the same animation, but for some magical reason you actually take damage, and of course you don't make the jump, or you don't clear the jump, and then you lose all your coins. So a very unfair system, in my opinion. You have to have that target cue or animation or graphic in the enemy in order for your attack to successfully defeat the enemy. If you're off by a frame, a little bit below or a little bit above the enemy, you're not gonna create damage, and you're gonna take the damage and lose all your coins. Extremely frustrating, especially in certain boss battles, though the final boss battle, to be more specific. And then also, some of the level designs woes that I had with this game, some of them are just infuriating. Like the second zone, the casino zone, Act 2, the very last portion of that stage has you do a platforming section on cards that are flipping. So you have to be very precise and very quick in order to jump from one moving card to the other, because the cards flip, and then they basically, when they flip, you fall into a pit, or basically you're dead. And I really despise this area of the game because, as I mentioned earlier, Sonic has a very slow startup speed, as opposed to like the Mario games. Like if you were to give me the Mario physics on that area, I would have cleared that in a couple of tries, 2-3 tries maybe, get familiar with where the cards are and what their patterns are. But with the Sonic game, even after you memorize the location of the cards, the pattern of the cards, the speed at which they rotate, you then have to fight with the controls. You have to fight with the physics of the game, and it wasn't a pleasant or it wasn't not a pleasant section of the game. And there are many sections like this in the game where, unfortunately, this is a type of game where the vast majority of the time that you die in the game, it's not because of your fault. It's mostly based on things that are out of your control, and that, in my opinion, is a major no-no in any video game. And as much as I like the Sonic character and franchise, I try to support these games. I'm a huge fan of side-scrolling platforming games, or platforming games in general. It's one of my favorite genres in gaming. As much as I love the genre, the Sonic universe and all that, this game, in my opinion, it was just a very unpleasant experience due to the physics and the some of the animations and just the overall level design, as I was explaining earlier. Now, why the heck did I beat the game if I was having such a bad time with it? Well, this goes back kind of like to when I reviewed, I don't know if you guys remember, it must have been like 3 or 4 years ago, Resistance on the PlayStation Vita. I on my review I said this is not one of my favorite first-person shooters. It was a pretty bland, pretty boring experience, but the game was short, so might as well beat the game and get the experience complete, if you will. And I felt the same way with this Sonic game. It's extremely short. You can probably beat the game in 2 hours, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less. And if you're very familiar with the levels, I can definitely see someone beating the game in an hour. So I said, I'm gonna buckle up and go all the way and defeat the final boss, which in its final form, the final boss basically, or the final boss stage, is basically like a boss or a rush mode where you fight the different types of Eggman. Surprise, surprise! The antagonist of this game is Dr. Eggman. So you fight the different versions of him that you fought in the other zones in the game, but the last zone, or the last version of his boss fight, has like a very special final boss fight that you haven't seen in the game, that has 3 stages basically. And the second stage was extremely frustrating, and also the first stage is pretty easy but pretty long. So it took me, I'm not gonna lie guys, it took me like maybe 20 tries to beat this final form of Dr. Eggman. Thankfully there's a checkpoint before this final form, but nevertheless, when you face a final form, he has like 3 phases. And the first phase is on the easy side, but it takes a while. And it takes a while because of the wonky physics and just a poor design, in my opinion. So I was very impatient. You had to play the easy part. It takes a while. And then finally, the second phase of that boss was the one that gave me headaches. But when I beat the game, it felt good. I'm not gonna lie. As much as I hated this game, as much as I consider this, completely honest here with one hand in my heart, as much as I think this is one of the worst platforming games I've ever played, it felt good seeing that trophy for beating the game pop up. Felt very, very satisfying, among one of the most satisfying trophies I've got in my PlayStation career here. But You know, in the end, was it worth it? I want to say yes, even though the game is bad, because you know it made me experience the game for what it is, and I'm just baffled at how a game that was released in 2010, like I can cut some slack if the game was released maybe in the late 90s, you know, a period of time where side-scrolling platforming games took a setback. You know, 3D games were the hot thing back then. So I can maybe cut some slack if the game got released during a period of time where you know, platforming games were not very popular. But by 2010, we had games like the new Super Mario games on the DS, for example, which I know a lot of people don't necessarily like those games, but they're very solid platforming games with very good physics and very solid controls. I believe by then, you know, games like Super Meat Boy, you know, like an indie type of games were already available back then with very precise controls. You know, those games are hard, like Super Meat Boy, but they're very fair. Like if you die, it's because of your fault. You know, the controls are very precise and whatnot. And even though Rayman Origins was not released before this Sonic 4, Rayman Origins was released, I believe, a year after. That just speaks, you know, that game, Rayman Origins, is one of my favorite platforming games of all time, and it has just a fantastic control scheme and physics and level design. So it's a little bit infuriating that Sonic Team actually assisted in this game. You know, the original level creator for a lot of the level design for 2 and 3 was involved in this game, and despite all that quote-unquote talent, you know, that participated in making this game a reality, I think this game falls flat to you know, in its face, unfortunately, you know. But nevertheless, I had a very frustrating time with the game, but at the same time, you know, I want to complete some of the Sonic games that I have not completed yet in my I guess gaming career. And the question now is, should I go ahead and torture myself and play episode 2? I think more than likely, yes. I'm going to go ahead and play the game again. Episode 2, I think it's very similar to episode 1, where the game is very short and can probably be beaten in under maybe 2 hours or so. So I may torture myself and go back and play episode 2. For those of you that don't know, supposedly episode 3 was supposed to come out, and because of the poor reception, Sega decided to pull the plug, which is, in my opinion, I'm not surprised, but hopefully, my hope is that for episode 2, the game will get a little bit better, whether in terms of physics or level design, although I really doubt it. There's a reason why episode 3 never was released. So again, it's a good game. I think if you guys are a Sonic fan, you should try the game, because again, a lot of the reviews of the game are not necessarily bad. They don't praise the game, but they're saying the game is okay. So don't take my word for it. My personal experiences might be different than yours, but I had a really stressful time with some of the levels and the physics in this game, but that's just me. So a little bit of a longer impressions video here, but hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all later.